comprehensive history of poverty. Poverty, a pervasive and enduring societal challenge, has left an indelible mark on human history. Its presence has shaped the course of civilizations, the dynamics of societies, and the lives of countless individuals. To grasp the complexities of poverty and its evolution, it is imperative to embark on a journey through time. A journey that unveils the multifaceted history of this enigmatic and often intractable issue. Definition and scope of poverty. Defining poverty is no simple task, for it transcends mere economic metrics. Poverty encompasses a state of deprivation that extends far beyond material wealth. It is a condition where individuals lack not only the basic necessities of life, such as food, shelter, and clothing, but also the fundamental opportunities and resources required to lead a dignified existence. This definition goes beyond the absence of monetary wealth and delves into the absence of access, capability, and security, dimensions that define the experience of poverty. The scope of poverty is vast, encompassing a spectrum of manifestations, each influenced by time, place, and context. It ranges from extreme destitution and homelessness to relative poverty, where individuals may have access to basic necessities but struggle to participate fully in the life of their society. Poverty affects not only the individual but also communities, regions, and nations, impacting social structures, economies, and policies. Significance of understanding the history of poverty. The history of poverty is more than a chronological account of societal inequalities. It is a critical lens through which we can comprehend the intricate interplay of human behavior, economic systems, and social structures. It offers profound insights into the roots of contemporary challenges and solutions. Understanding the history of poverty is significant for several reasons. 1. Contextualizing contemporary poverty. The past informs the present. By tracing the historical trajectories of poverty, we gain insights into the enduring factors that perpetuate it today. Recognizing the origins of contemporary poverty can guide more effective interventions and policies. 2. Illuminating inequalities. Poverty is inextricably linked to social, economic, and political inequalities. Examining the history of poverty unveils the root causes of these disparities, shedding light on their persistence and evolution over time. 3. Inspiring empathy and action. Learning about the historical experiences of those who faced poverty can foster empathy and inspire action. It challenges us to confront the moral imperatives of alleviating suffering and addressing the structural injustices that perpetuate poverty. 4. Shaping future strategies. A nuanced understanding of the history of poverty empowers us to develop more informed and comprehensive strategies for poverty reduction. By learning from both past successes and failures, we can chart a course toward a more equitable future. The ancient origins of poverty. 1. Prehistoric and early societies. Poverty in hunter-gatherer communities. In the annals of human history, the earliest societies were those of hunter-gatherers. These communities lived in harmony with their natural surroundings, relying on hunting, foraging, and gathering to meet their basic needs. While poverty, as we understand it today, may not have existed in these societies in the same form, the experiences of deprivation and resource scarcity were not foreign to them. Poverty in hunter-gatherer communities, resource scarcity, and seasonal variability. Life in hunter-gatherer communities was marked by the rhythms of nature. The availability of food, water, and other resources fluctuated with the seasons and geographical locations. This variability meant that at times, these communities faced scarcities that could be seen as early forms of poverty. For instance, during harsh winters or in regions with limited resources, individuals and groups might experience periods of nutritional scarcity. Collective sharing systems. One distinctive feature of these societies was their reliance on collective sharing systems. When resources were scarce for one family or individual, others within the group would share their bounty. This mutual support system was not only essential for survival, but also for forging social bonds within the community. It helped alleviate the impact of temporary resource shortages. Emerging forms of inequality. Even in these early societies, the seeds of social hierarchies and inequalities were sown. While hunter-gatherer communities generally shared resources collectively, some individuals may have garnered more influence, prestige, or access to resources due to their age, skills, or leadership qualities. These emerging forms of inequality were relatively minor compared to the profound disparities seen in later civilizations, but they were the early precursors of social stratification. Resource acquisition and gender roles. In these communities, the roles of men and women were often distinct but complementary. Men typically engaged in hunting, while women gathered plants and tended to domestic tasks. Gender roles influenced access to resources, with both men and women contributing to the community's overall well-being. Inclusivity and interdependence. Despite the challenges of resource scarcity, hunter-gatherer communities upheld values of inclusivity and interdependence. Survival often depended on collective action and cooperation, reinforcing the idea that the welfare of one member was linked to the welfare of the entire group. Nomadic lifestyles. Hunter-gatherers were nomadic, moving in response to the availability of resources. This mobility allowed them to adapt to changing environmental conditions and avoid depleting local resources. It was a strategy that helped mitigate poverty in the form of resource scarcity. While the poverty experienced in these early societies differed fundamentally from modern conceptions, it laid the foundation for the evolution of poverty as societies transitioned to settled agricultural communities. The hunter-gatherer way of life, marked by resource variability and collective support, provided a glimpse into the primal human experience, where the struggle for survival was not just an individual endeavor, but a collective venture. Poverty in ancient civilizations. Poverty in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. The pages of history reveal that poverty was not an exclusive concern of modernity, but a recurring challenge that affected some of the world's earliest civilizations. In this chapter, we delve into the experiences of poverty in three pivotal ancient civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Poverty in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, often hailed as the cradle of civilization, encompassed the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in present-day Iraq. This region gave birth to the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, among others. While these civilizations achieved remarkable feats in architecture, mathematics, and governance, they also grappled with issues of poverty. Resource distribution. Wealth in Mesopotamia was unevenly distributed. The control of arable land and resources lay predominantly in the hands of the ruling elite, kings, priests, and landowners. This concentration of power resulted in disparities, where a significant portion of the population struggled to access sufficient food and resources. Debt bondage. Debt bondage was a prevalent form of impoverishment in Mesopotamia. Individuals who fell into debt often found themselves bound to their creditors, forced into labor or servitude until their debts were repaid. This practice could perpetuate generational poverty. Religious and charitable institutions. Mesopotamian societies also had religious and charitable institutions, such as temples and palaces, that played a role in addressing poverty. These institutions collected offerings and distributed them to the needy, providing a form of social welfare. Poverty in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt, with its grand pyramids and complex societal structure, was another cradle of civilization. Here, too, poverty was a feature of daily life. Social stratification. Egyptian society was hierarchically structured, with the pharaoh at the top, followed by the nobility, priests, scribes, and laborers. Those at the bottom of this hierarchy, including peasants and laborers, often faced economic hardships, slavery, and indentured labor. Slavery played a significant role in Egyptian society. Slaves were often acquired through warfare and trade. Additionally, indentured laborers worked on public projects such as building the pyramids, which could be physically demanding and arduous. Public granaries and redistribution. To mitigate the impact of fluctuations in agricultural production, Egypt had a system of public granaries. These granaries stored surplus grain that could be distributed during times of scarcity, helping to stabilize food availability. Poverty in the Indus Valley civilization. The Indus Valley civilization, one of the world's earliest urban societies, thrived in the Indian subcontinent around 3,300. 1300 BCE. While much about this civilization remains enigmatic, archaeological evidence suggests that poverty was a concern. Urban planning and sanitation, the Indus Valley cities, such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were known for their advanced urban planning, including drainage systems and organized streets. However, the presence of overcrowded areas and differences in housing quality suggests disparities in living conditions. Trade and social hierarchy. Trade was a central feature of the Indus Valley civilization. A social hierarchy likely existed, with merchants, craftsmen, and laborers coexisting. Those engaged in lower-tier occupations may have experienced economic hardships. In these ancient civilizations, poverty was intertwined with social hierarchies, resource distribution, and labor practices. The emergence of systems of indebtedness, slavery, and labor obligations created conditions where poverty could persist. While some efforts were made to address poverty through religious and charitable institutions, poverty remained a recurrent theme in the early annals of human civilization, foreshadowing the complexities it would assume in subsequent eras. Medieval and feudal poverty. Feudalism and serfdom. Feudal systems and the concentration of wealth. The feudal era, which spanned much of the Middle Ages in Europe, was characterized by a hierarchical system of land ownership and labor relationships. At the heart of feudalism was the concept of fiefdoms, where land was granted in exchange for loyalty and service. Within this structure, the concentration of wealth and power was pronounced, leading to significant disparities in society. Feudal systems and the concentration of wealth, land ownership and nobility. Feudal society was organized around a pyramid of land ownership. At the pinnacle were monarchs, followed by nobility such as lords and barons. Below them were knights, and at the base were serfs and peasants. Land was the primary source of wealth and power, and the nobility controlled the vast majority of it. Feudal obligations. In exchange for land, fiefs, vassals swore oaths of fealty to their lords and provided military service when required. This system of reciprocal obligations extended downwards through the social hierarchy. Lords, in turn, pledged loyalty to their monarchs. Manorial system. The manor, a self-contained agricultural estate, was the economic center of feudal life. It included the lord's residence, villages, and surrounding lands. Serfs and peasants worked the land, producing goods and food for the entire manor. A portion of the produce was retained by the lord as rent or taxation. Wealth accumulation. The lord of the manor accumulated wealth through various means, including the labor of serfs and peasants, taxes, and control of resources. Over time, this concentration of wealth led to significant disparities between the nobility and the common people. Limited social mobility. Social mobility was constrained in feudal society. Serfs and peasants were bound to the land and their lords, with few opportunities for advancement. Birth determined one's place in the social hierarchy, and upward mobility was rare. Inequality and patronage. Feudalism perpetuated inequalities not only in wealth, but also in access to justice and privileges. Lords had the authority to administer justice on their estates, and serfs had limited legal rights. Patronage relationships, where individuals relied on the protection and support of more powerful figures, were common. The life of serfs and peasants, labor and agriculture. Serfs and peasants comprised the majority of the population in feudal society. They were responsible for working the land, cultivating crops, and tending to livestock. Agricultural labor was physically demanding and dictated by the seasons. Manorial obligations. Serfs were bound to the land they worked and owed various obligations to their lords. These obligations included labor on the lord's domain, land reserved for the lord's use, payments in kind or labor, corvée, and feudal dues. Housing and living conditions. Serfs and peasants typically lived in simple, thatched roof cottages. Living conditions were modest, and access to amenities like healthcare and education was limited. Life expectancy was shorter than that of the nobility. Limited freedom. Serfs did not have the freedom to leave the manor without their lord's permission. While they were not slaves in the traditional sense, their mobility and autonomy were severely restricted. Resistance and uprisings. Throughout the feudal era, serfs and peasants periodically rebelled against the harsh conditions of their lives. These uprisings, such as the Peasants' Revolt in England and the Jacquerie in France, were attempts to seek better treatment and rights. The feudal system was characterized by a stark division between the land-owning nobility and the laboring serfs and peasants. This division led to significant economic and social inequalities, with the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a privileged few. While the system provided some degree of stability, it also perpetuated disparities and limited the freedoms and opportunities of those at the lower rungs of society. Poverty in medieval cities, urbanization, and the rise of slums. The medieval period witnessed a significant transformation in Europe, with the growth of cities and the development of urban centers. While this urbanization brought about economic opportunities and cultural advancements, it also gave rise to new challenges, including the proliferation of poverty in urban areas. Urbanization and the growth of medieval cities, population shift. The medieval era saw a shift in population from rural agrarian settings to cities. This movement was driven by factors such as increased trade, the growth of artisan industries, and the allure of urban life. Economic opportunities. Cities became hubs of economic activity, offering employment in various trades, crafts, and commercial enterprises. This drew people from the countryside in search of work and economic prosperity. The rise of slums, overcrowding, and housing conditions. As cities expanded rapidly, housing shortages became a pressing issue. This led to overcrowded living conditions, with multiple families often sharing small dwellings. Slums, characterized by squalid, cramped housing, began to emerge on the outskirts of cities. Unsanitary conditions. Slum areas lacked basic sanitation infrastructure, leading to unsanitary living conditions. Lack of access to clean water, proper waste disposal, and sewage systems contributed to the spread of diseases. Social segregation. Cities in the medieval period were often socially stratified. While the wealthy lived in more affluent neighborhoods, the urban poor were relegated to slum areas, reinforcing social divisions. Economic disparities. Poverty in medieval cities was exacerbated by economic disparities. The wealth generated by trade and commerce was concentrated in the hands of merchants and guilds, leaving many urban dwellers struggling to make ends meet. Guilds, beggars, and charitable institutions. Medieval guilds. Guilds played a central role in medieval urban life. These associations of craftsmen and merchants regulated their respective industries, ensuring quality standards and protecting the interests of their members. While guilds provided economic stability for their members, they also restricted entry, limiting opportunities for newcomers. Beggars and the urban poor. Beggars and the urban poor were a visible presence in medieval cities. Individuals who could not secure employment or lacked support networks often resorted to begging as a means of survival. Beggars ranged from the homeless to those displaced by economic changes. Charitable institutions. The medieval period saw the establishment of charitable institutions, including hospitals, almshouses, and religious orders dedicated to caring for the poor. These institutions provided food, shelter, and medical care to those in need. However, access to these services was often limited, and the care provided varied. Social attitudes towards poverty. Medieval society held complex attitudes towards poverty. While charity was considered a virtue, there was also a stigma attached to begging and poverty. Laws were enacted to regulate begging, and some cities attempted to control the movement of the urban poor. In medieval cities, the process of urbanization brought about both opportunities and challenges. While cities offered economic prospects, they also witnessed the growth of slums, overcrowding, and the persistence of poverty. Guilds played a dual role, fostering economic stability for their members while limiting opportunities for others. Charitable institutions provided some relief for the urban poor, but societal attitudes towards poverty remained complex. The dynamics of poverty in medieval cities continue to offer insights into the enduring challenges of urbanization and economic disparities. The Age of Exploration and Colonial Poverty. The era of exploration and colonization, primarily during the 15th to 19th centuries, marked a pivotal period in human history. European powers embarked on voyages to distant lands, resulting in the discovery of the New World and establishing vast colonial empires. While these journeys brought about remarkable advancements in science, culture, and global connectivity, they also ushered in a dark chapter marred by the brutal exploitation of indigenous populations and the transatlantic slave trade. In this article, we delve into the profound impacts of colonialism on indigenous peoples and the horrors of forced labor that have left a lasting legacy on the world. Colonialism and indigenous populations. The tragic consequences. 1. Cultural disruption. The arrival of European colonizers brought about a seismic shift in the lives of indigenous populations. As Europeans settled in the Americas, Africa, Asia, and other regions, they imposed their cultures, religions, and languages, often erasing or marginalizing indigenous traditions. This cultural disruption still echoes through the descendants of indigenous communities today. 2. Land dispossession. Colonial powers sought to exploit the vast natural resources of newly discovered lands. In pursuit of this objective, they often seized indigenous territories, dispossessing native populations from their ancestral lands. This land loss disrupted traditional ways of life and led to the forced migration of indigenous communities. 3. Disease and demographic catastrophe. The arrival of European diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza had devastating effects on indigenous populations who had no immunity to these pathogens. This resulted in demographic catastrophe, with indigenous communities experiencing staggering declines in population. The transatlantic slave trade and forced labor, a dark legacy. 1. Origins and scale. The transatlantic slave trade was a system of forced labor that forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas to work on plantations, mines, and other industries. The scale of this trade was staggering, with an estimated 12.5 million Africans subjected to enslavement, with millions losing their lives during the brutal voyage across the Atlantic. 2. Inhuman conditions. Enslaved Africans endured unimaginable suffering during the Middle Passage, the journey from Africa to the Americas. They were packed into cramped, disease-ridden ships, often chained together in squalid conditions. Many died from disease, starvation, or violence before ever reaching their destination. 3. Impact on African societies. The transatlantic slave trade had profound consequences for African societies. It disrupted social structures, led to power struggles, and fueled conflict as European powers vied for control over African territories. The loss of millions of able-bodied individuals to slavery had a lasting impact on the continent's development. 4. Legacy of racism and inequality. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade endures in the form of systemic racism and inequality. Enslaved Africans and their descendants in the Americas faced centuries of discrimination, segregation, and violence. The effects of this oppression continue to shape social, economic, and political dynamics in many countries today. Conclusion. Remembering the past, shaping the future. The era of exploration and colonization brought about immense change and upheaval in the world. While it ushered in new ideas, technologies, and trade routes, it also left a dark legacy of suffering, exploitation, and cultural disruption. Understanding the impact of colonialism on indigenous populations and the horrors of forced labor is essential in acknowledging the historical injustices that persist in today's world. By remembering the past, we can work toward a future marked by equality, justice, and respect for all peoples, irrespective of their origins or circumstances.